All right, welcome back. I hope you've been enjoying this series so far, Pursuing Christ in Conflict. Now, that's a heavy one. I know some of you, this is even sensitive to your life right now, that you're at a position where this isn't theory, this is life. And I would say, welcome. That's why I'm covering this topic. How do we honor the Lord in our conflict? So I left off last episode, and I hope you're watching these sequentially. I left off by saying, look, James 4 says that conflict actually starts in our hearts. Not in our work, not in our wallet, not in these other areas, but it actually starts in our heart. So hear me out. Where is the solution going to start? That's ground zero. This is step one. If you do follow through and get the book, The Peacemaker, which I highly commend to you, step one for conflict, from what Dr. Sandy is going to say, is glorifying God. That is the first G at step one. What does that mean? Well, I actually encourage you, and I'll encourage others in the counseling process, to use this passage from 2 Corinthians 5. Paul is talking about being in his earthly body or being away from it. He describes the nature of our life while we are in this body, which is that we walk by faith and not by sight. And then in verse 9, he says, so whether we are at home or we are away, we make it our aim to please Him. Let's say it in another way. No matter what we're doing, we want to glorify the Lord. If we're dead or alive, in this context, home is whether we are with the Lord or we're away from the Lord. Wherever we're at, we're going to glorify God. That is our first principle. Pursuing Christ in conflict means that no matter what, I want to glorify God. So let me tease out two different applications of that thought. When you think about conflict, sometimes if you're like me, I come from a more genteel, southern, typically an approach of a roundabout way of addressing conflict. So if we have disagreement, my natural response is to think, well, there's already been a failure somewhere, like there's some problem. But I want you to see that conflict actually creates opportunities for us to glorify the Lord. That's what Dr. Sandy says in his book, that you can glorify the Lord, but not only can you, but it actually creates opportunities for you to. You see, some of us really have to depend on Christ when we are in interpersonal conflict. It wears on us. We lose sleep. We lose an appetite. We lose a desire to do anything else but think about that drama and that conflict that we have. So as you're thinking of conflict in this way, I would say, first of all, remember that just because there is disagreement between you and another individual doesn't mean that you have failed. You have failed whenever you have sinned. That is a failure. You see, I can have a different perspective, a different way of thinking about things, a different set of gifts, all of those, yes, and those can contribute to interpersonal conflict. But a true failure is when I have dishonored the Lord. That's a true failure. So what is the first opportunity that I can actually honor the Lord in this disagreement? The second aspect that I would like to bring up out of this concept is that not only would I say I can honor the Lord, but that is my number one goal, is to honor the Lord. Pursuing Christ is our number one goal. Not just in word, not just in a formality, not just in a doctrinal confession, but to say, you know what? My motivation right now is to please Christ. So whether home or away, I'm going to do everything that I can to be pleasing to Him. What does that mean that we are not primarily motivated by? Are you ready for this? My number one goal is not peace. Although I would love to have peace, praise the Lord, peace is a byproduct of honoring the Lord. So Philippians 4, when you start to look at the way that peace comes, it is through prayer. It's through not being anxious. It's through making supplication. And then the peace of God, which guards your hearts and passes all understanding, it will come. But in conflict resolution, if you worship peace, you'll never have it. You'll be a peace faker, and I'll be a peace faker, and we'll never get to experience that relational harmony that we really, really, really want. Our first goal is to please Christ, and if we don't have immediate peace in our relationships, that's not great, but we're okay with that. Why? Because we want to honor the Lord in this. Reconciliation is not our number one goal. Oh, how I would love for things to go back to the way that they were, as if this conflict had never occurred, but it has. And we're here. and we got to deal with it. So what are we going to do? Well, in that moment, if I make reconciliation my God, then I will compromise honoring the Lord so I can have reconciliation. You see, peace and reconciliation, while they can be secondary goals, they're not our primary goal. What's our primary goal in conflict? That we would please the Lord. Glorify God. Numero uno, glorify God. So if I don't get reconciliation, and I want reconciliation, if I don't get it, am I glorifying the Lord? If I don't get immediate peace, maybe it actually makes things worse for a season when we're talking about relational harmony. If I don't get immediate peace, will I still do what's pleasing to the Lord? Hopefully the answer is yes, you will. If you're committed to being a biblical peacemaker, it starts with you saying, you know what? In this time where I'm not getting what I want, I am going to commit to one dominating desire. Are you ready for it? It came directly from the text. I am going to commit to glorifying God. That is what I really, 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 dare I say, really, really, really want in the end. I want God to be honored in my life. So listener, think of it this way. You have desires and I have desires, James 4, and those desires are contributing to conflict. So when we don't get the things that we want, it contributes to conflict. How do we get out of that vicious cycle of conflict? By saying, even if I don't get that thing, peace, gratitude, appreciation, compensation, even if I don't get that thing, I'm not going to fight and quarrel. Why? Because I want to please the Lord, number one. When you get stuck in the vicious cycle of I'm not getting what I want, so you don't get what you want, I'm not going to do what you're asking me, I'm not going to listen, there's no way to break that cycle other than to say, I want God to be honored in this time. I want Him to be pleased. And if God is pleased in me, that is a success. And that will most likely result in harmony and peace in relationships, but not always. But either way, that is a success. I will say to you that this is the meat of the Word, and I joke with this with my students here at Masters. This is the meat of the Word. If I don't get what I immediately want, I'm going to please the Lord. That is step one. Commit to that. Commit to pleasing Christ even if you're not getting what you immediately want. Step one. Step two, are you ready for it? Comes from Matthew chapter 7. So let's go over to Matthew 7 and let me introduce this idea. In order for you and I to be effective peacemakers, we have to have some level of structure and acumen for understanding how we resolve conflict. The second step in promoting peace, being a biblical peacemaker, comes from Matthew 7, starting in verse 3, which says this: Why do you see the speck that is in your brother's eye, but do not notice the log that is in your own eye? How can you say to your brother, let me take the speck out of your eye, when there is the log in your own eye? You hypocrite! First, take the log out of your own eye, and then you will see clearly to take the speck out of your brother's eye. What is the second step for biblical conflict resolution? Own your faults, also known as getting the log out of your eye. Think of the hyperbolic statement that's mentioned here. The speck that is in your brother's eye, we notice. But yet you fail to notice this beam. There's a beam coming from my own eye, but like an eagle, I can see that small issue in your life. I joke with my wife, it's like I have eagle eye vision to notice the sins of others, but I'm functionally blind to my own at times. Matthew 7 says, you know what? Before you begin to help your brother with the speck, and there are legitimate specks in our brother's eyes, you have to be willing to address any logs that are in your own eyes. What does that mean practically? Own your own faults. Own how you are contributing to this conflict. And think beyond actions, also think attitudes. So we got to stop for today, and when we come back in our next episode, I'm going to pick up with this idea of owning your faults and then doing so in a way to where you're not falling on the relational sword, but you authentically will own your actions and attitudes that are wrong. I hope you'll join me next time.